Welcome back to jwforwardcast, the show that helps former Jehovah's Witnesses pick up the pieces, put them back together, and build them into something awesome. So in today's interview, I'm taking things a little bit in-house, and I'll be chatting to fellow JW Survey team member, Chloe Leon. Chloe's kind of a badass. You'll probably work that out as you listen to the interview. She has done some really awesome things since she left the Jehovah's Witnesses, which include kickstarting her career, traveling the world, and joining the circus. Yes, you heard right, joining the circus. We will be discussing that. Chloe also, unfortunately, has experience of dealing with domestic violence when she was in the Jehovah's Witnesses. And she talks about that very frankly. And she also talks about moving forward and overcoming that experience, which is very inspiring to listen to. It's a really good interview, and I think you're really going to like this one. So before we get on to the interview, I'm just going to do a quick bit of housekeeping. So first of all, I want to give a huge shout out to two very kind new patrons of the show who are supporting us over at patreon.com/Covert Fade. A massive thank you to Viv and Robert K. Your support is very much appreciated. And if you'd like to support the show on Patreon, you can find us, as I've said, patreon.com/Covert Fade. And in return for your support, you'll get all sorts of goodies, everything from early access to the show, to access to Ask Me Anything episodes, the Patreon exclusive show, The Covert Files, film commentaries, and much, much more. Also, I thought I'd give you a quick sneak peek into what's coming up on the show in the near future. I've recorded an interview with Jeremy Howell, aka Mentally Diseased, on YouTube, or if you follow him on Twitter, he's on @Germ on Twitter. He's an exJW activist with a very interesting story. If you check him out on YouTube, you can find more about him. But we discussed a number of topics, including dating, because I'm straight and Jeremy's gay, and we kind of discussed the different challenges that face exJWs when they try and start dating in inverted commas real life when they leave the cult, and also get Jeremy's perspective on the gay side of that, what it's like to be a gay exJW trying to integrate into that community. It's a really interesting episode, and I think you guys will like it. That's coming soon. Also, with Alice Cheshire, I've recorded some more answers to listener questions that have been very kindly sent in, either to jwforwardcast@gmail.com or sent to us on Twitter or other locations. Those will be coming soon as well, so stay tuned for those. And there's 2 more interviews with guests. I don't want to spoil it yet, but there's some really interesting guests who'll be appearing on the show in short order. So that brings us to the end of the housekeeping. So without further ado, I give you Chloe Leon. Chloe, how are you doing today?
Good. It's evening here in New Zealand. How are you?
I am very well. I have a little bit of hay fever, so my apologies to anyone who finds me unusually croaky or low energy during this interview. I'm dosing myself up with stuff at the moment, but yeah. How's New Zealand? That's where they filmed all the Lord of the Rings films, wasn't it?
Yes, and actually Peter Jackson lives in Wellington, where I live. So I did the Lord of the Rings tour just cause you kind of have to. Yeah. So a lot of it was filmed in public spaces here in New Zealand as well, because it's so beautiful. It is actually gorgeous in real life as well. So I'm loving it.
Nice. Do people from New Zealand get a bit annoyed when people from other places turn up and just talk about Lord of the Rings, or do they quite like it?
It depends what kind of tone you have when you do. So the tour guide was saying that some people are like die-hard Lord of the Rings fans, and they like correct him and stuff, and it's kind of obnoxious. But other people are kind of really excited and they find it kind of cute.
Awesome. So if you're planning to do a Lord of the Rings tour, just be kind of cute and don't correct the tour guide, and you'll be okay. That's what I'm saying.
Because everyone here is super chill. So yeah, stay chill, guys.
Awesome. So yeah, New Zealand's actually on my list of places to visit. So I'll have to get around to doing that. Yeah. So Chloe, you are part of the JW survey team. You've been part of the team for quite a while.
And there's a number of reasons I actually wanted to get you onto this show, because we've obviously been talking and I've been kind of getting to know your story over the months and years. And I think there's a lot of interesting experiences you had, both in your JW life and also then when you kind of like left and started to explore your own life, that I think would be really useful for the audience to hear. Could you just start by giving us a quick outline of like who you were as a JW, what your JW life was like, and sort of how you ended up leaving?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a kind of brief summary, because I think I've done some videos online giving a kind of longer story of up until I left kind of thing. But in brief, really, my mum started going to Jehovah's Witness meetings when I was about probably like a toddler, super young, and she really, really enjoyed it and everything like that. And then after a couple of years, she was actually disfellowshipped for a while, and then we did leave. So I had like a good chunk of my childhood as not a Jehovah's Witness. And then actually when I got to about 11 or 12, she decided that she really wanted to go back to Jehovah's organization, as she called it. And we did. And then after that, at first, I was kind of reluctant. But then as soon as I started going to meetings and started being convinced that this was the truth, we became quite zealous as a family, to be honest. I would do lots of ministry, auxiliary pioneering and school holidays. I became an unbaptized publisher at 13, and I was baptized at 14. Yeah, baptized on the 7th of the 7th, 2007. Super holy.
Spiritual completeness.
Right. I mean, it worked for me. And then actually after a little while, so everything was great. Had lots of friends, hung out with people, parties. It was a nice environment as a child, teenager growing up. We had tons of friends, so we had lots of social gatherings. Always at every single meeting. If we went on holiday, it was usually we would go to the meetings there as well. So my mum was very, very into it. And then as the years kind of went by, we started having some troubles within our family. So my ex-stepdad now, he was somewhat violent on quite a number of occasions. Fortunately, towards me, not so many, because by the time he had started kind of getting violent with me, I was around 16, 17 years old, and I was just not going to have it, really. And how it all kind of went down was that we went to the elders about it, and unfortunately, just with a lot of other people who were in this kind of domestic violence situation, the elders really didn't want to address it properly, and there was lots of questioning whether I did something wrong and I should just forget about it and forgive him now and all of that kind of thing. So at 19, I moved to London. I went to a new congregation. Everything seemed to be going fine. And then there was a few things, and I had just decided, well, it's a bit more complicated than that. My mum still had issues with my ex-stepdad because he was trying to get hold of my brother and trying to take custody of him. It was a whole big mess, actually. And my mum ended up in hospital. And when she was in hospital, because she was disfellowshipped at the time, none of her friends went to see her, and that really was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back with me. And when I went to help her, I then decided, you know what, I never want to go back to a meeting ever again. And I didn't. It was around 20, 21, yeah. So that's kind of up until the point of leaving, and in brief, a nice summary there. Yeah, there's lots of ups and downs, and it's really strange as well, because you go from being such a zealous family and putting Jehovah first and doing everything that the elders and the congregation and the watchtower tells you to do, to like hanging out with Bethelites and feeling like you're on top of the world and you're definitely doing the right thing, to it kind of all falling apart and you really not understanding what you did to kind of, for it to fall apart that way.
Yeah, and that's as you said, you've kind of gone into more detail about your story in other places, and we'll put those links up in the show notes if people want to go and kind of get the intricate details of your JW background. But it's interesting to note that one of the aspects that you had to deal with is this issue of the domestic violence in your family. And it's interesting because I think increasingly we're aware of often some of the the abuses that go on behind closed doors in Jehovah's Witnesses. And usually at the moment, the attention understandably goes to the child abuse scandals that are going on. Right. People are increasingly aware of the terrible mishandling of child sex abuse inside the Jehovah's Witness organization. But we're also increasingly coming to be aware of the issue of domestic violence. Because I know when I was growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, I thought that just didn't happen inside Jehovah's Witnesses, that there was no way domestic violence could happen. And if that it did happen, it would be dealt with. The elders would get involved and everything would be made okay. And so it was quite, listening to you talk about and your family talk about what you and your mother and your family went through, and also listening more and more to other former Jehovah's Witnesses talk about, this was an issue in my family as well. If possible, could you talk a little bit about what this, because this is one of the reasons I wanted to discuss this. I think a lot of exJWs, from what I understand, actually have encountered this in their JW life and might now be trying to deal with it. So can you elaborate a little on what your domestic violence experience was like as a Jehovah's Witness and how the elders basically failed to deal with it?
Yeah. So by no means was my experience, one of the worst. I've heard stories since I left of, really terrible, horrible, horrific injuries and people feeling like they're imprisoned for what feels like years and years. For me, it was a bit different. Before we started going back to meetings, he had hit my mum on a few occasions. I remember one time when she was pregnant, and I thought, okay, well, now that we're going to meetings, this is obviously not going to happen anymore because it's obviously wrong, right? So, but he did have a temper, and he did find that my mum kind of was a bit of a trigger for him in that way, and alcohol was a bit of a trigger for him. If he couldn't have the alcohol that he wanted at the time that he wanted, then it could kind of then lead to a violent situation where it was kind of very scary as a child. But what for me is what is most vivid for me is between the ages around 16, 17, there were a number of occasions where he had hit me quite badly, and I thought to myself, that's not closed fist discipline. The first time I had no physical injuries on me, but we still went to the elders, went to a specific elder that was designated to be our book study person at the time. And I really didn't feel like he was a very warm person at all. It was not something that I wanted to be. And we ended up having the adults all ended up having conversations about it, and it was basically swept under the rug. Like, okay, he's sorry, we're not going to talk about this anymore. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess that's being dealt with. Some kind of discipline for him. And then the other occasion, there happened to be a few little things where I felt scared and terrified that something bad was going to happen, but it wasn't as bad as that. But then on another occasion, which really was the turning point for me as far as my relationship with him, it was never going to be the same again, was we had gone to do actually something in the foreign ministry. So we were in a Polish group, and we'd gone to go on the ministry there in a different city or something. And my mum had forgotten to buy bread, of all things, and he got so angry about it. So we ended up going back home, and it turned into a fully blown violent situation where he was hitting my mum And then I went up to him like, no, this is not going to happen, kind of standing up for her in a way. And then his attention turned to me. And there was closed fist punching. There was, kicking me when I was down on the floor. My back was to the wall. He had his hands around my throat. And I did leave that situation with a black eye, and we had basically fled to the car and gone to an elder's house. That elder was a different elder. That elder then left us outside whilst he called elders, made us sit in the car for what felt like an eternity while he was making these calls. Right. But the weirdest thing as well is like one of my very good friends and her family lived next door. And we were like, well, can we just go into my friend's house so that I can like have a shower, put on some other clothes? Because I was also covered in beer from this whole palaver, because he had he was angry because I wanted to pour away the alcohol because I felt like the alcohol was his trigger. And in that case, he then had just poured it all over me as well. So I'm, kind of black and blue, covered in alcohol, had nothing with us. And he made us sit outside when my really good friend is right there, because he didn't want them to know anything. He also didn't want his wife to know anything. And she was inside. So we were just sat outside, and my mum was like, well, if we can't go somewhere else, maybe we'll go to a battered wives shelter or something and go get help. And he was like, no. We're going to we'll deal with it. So goodness knows who he spoke to and what he did. In the end, they let us, I say let us because it's insane that they have that much control over you. Go next door to my friend's house, and we spent the night there and everything. But again, the situation was not dealt with in a way that he is wrong, you're right, you're a victim, let's go to the police, or you should go to the police and report this. None of that. It was discouraged. Don't go to the police because you will bring reproach upon Jehovah's name. Since then, that elder refutes saying that, but it's a total lie because he did, and he did discourage it. And in the end, I think maybe my ex-stepdad's privileges were removed, and that was pretty much about it. They encouraged us to be a family again, sit together in meetings, and it was really traumatic for me at the time. I was 17 years old. I was full-time auxiliary pioneering as well. So I was doing everything I was supposed to be doing. And I thought, okay, right, I'll do what they say. I'll sit with him. I don't really want to. I feel disgusting sitting here. Nobody knows that this thing has happened. I went to a wedding with a black eye to be family. And I'd put makeup on. Went to several weddings, there's so many of them. Around that time, and it was just awfully, I was very confused because I didn't really know, hadn't been in that situation before. Am I wrong? Am I really wrong? Is Jehovah really upset with me for this situation? And I learned a few years later that the elders had asked my mum, what had I done that was wrong? Was he just
Wow.
I mean, I don't know if you call strangling someone against the wall discipline, or, maybe in their mind, really, it's against the law and it's violent.
Yeah.
Right? Especially to a minor.
Absolutely.
And then the cherry on top of the cake, after we would not stop talking about this, two things happened. The circuit overseer, I will never forget his name. I really think that he is a nasty person, if I'm really honest. He called me over in front of people, and there were other elders there, 17 years old, regular auxiliary pioneering, having all of these trials and tribulations, thinking, oh, maybe he's going to give me some encouragement because I'm trying so hard. Maybe. This is what I thought. I get to him, and he says to me in public, there's other people in the hall, at the back of the hall, and he says, sister, you're regular auxiliary pioneering, aren't you? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, well, with this whole other situation, you're really treading on thin ice, and you really need to stop talking about it now.
Good grief.
Right. And I will never forget that, because that is a man in a perceived position of authority basically telling you to shut up about a situation that you should be going to the police about.
Yeah.
Pretty insane. And then a few months after that, I would say probably, well, maybe not months. I think it was a little bit after that. My mum was actually disfellowshipped because she talked about the domestic violence to other sisters in the congregation, that the elders weren't doing anything about it. And she got disfellowshipped for reviling. Who would have known that was a thing?
So I just want to make that absolutely clear that you were publicly warned by the circuit overseer in front of people to stop talking about the fact that you had been physically assaulted by a member of your family, and they'd made it clear that they didn't want anyone knowing that this crime had been committed. And then your mother was disfellowshipped for talking to other people about the fact that she had been physically assaulted by a Jehovah's Witness.
Well, it was more, she was actually disfellowshipped more because she was talking about the fact that the elders were doing nothing about it.
Which they weren't.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Because technically then they're saying that she's like murmuring against the people who've been put there by God, pretty much. They were the type of scriptures that were used.
I mean, it's hard to listen to because, and again, I think this illustrates one of the problems that many ex-Jehovah's Witnesses start to realize is being a Jehovah's Witness makes people do things which are completely contrary to common sense and what their natural behaviors would be. Like that elder who you and your family first went to on that time you were all physically assaulted. The natural response of that person should not be to try and make a family sit in a car whilst he makes a phone call. The natural human response is to sort of invite people in, see if they're okay, take care of them, care for injuries. Obviously, like you say, you wanted to take a shower and just try and show some humanity. Right. But instead you kind of have this weird bureaucratic overlay of like, well, I have to call people and get permission to see what I'm supposed to do. Which is it sounds completely insane when you're not a Jehovah's Witness, but if you are a Jehovah's Witness, you'd be going like, well, that's the process. The elder's got to find out what he's supposed to.
Right. Which is so crazy now when you think about it. Like, if my friend had a bad date, I'd be like, oh my goodness, come over, let me help you. Do you want to stay? You want a cup of tea? Do you want dinner? Like, if my friend had something as traumatic as that happen, I would be like, what are we going to do about it? Come here. I will take care of you. Like, I couldn't imagine doing that to anybody. It just doesn't seem normal at all. But in that situation, you're like, oh, this person told me because they're in this position of authority that you just do it, but you're confused. I don't know. I'm guessing a lot of people have been in that kind of situation because I don't think I'm unique to that kind of thing.
I think I agree. I mean, that's one of the things we know. And this is one of the things we know, like with, for example, with child sex abuse, we know lots of survivors have been put in that situation. And I think what we're increasingly finding out as more and more, survivors of domestic violence talk about their stories, we're sort of seeing the same pattern emerge that it's like, well, don't go, keep it quiet. Don't let people know, it will bring shame on Jehovah's name. And by the way, it's probably your fault for provoking them. That seems to be and do you think there's a culture, because when they were talking about, the elders were sort of saying, well, was he disciplining you? Yeah. My experience of growing up, and I did not encounter what I would call domestic violence, but I certainly know I was the phrase some people might use is smacked. I think I would, I can remember of a couple of occasions where I was like full on pummeled. Yeah. And there is kind of a culture within the Jehovah's Witnesses of accepting that, inverted commas, physical chastisement is what you should be doing as a parent. And what they tend to count as physical chastisement can actually cross that line quite easily into what I think most reasonable people would consider, for something that's far too physical. Do you think there's a culture of accepting that in the JWs?
From people that I've heard of since I've left, it seems to be a correlation between domestic violence and being asked whether, kind of victim blaming almost.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't just say it's just with, I wouldn't know as far as like disciplining children, if I'm really honest, because I haven't had that kind of exposure to people who've talked about it. But I mean, with any kind of situation where there is a clear victim in a situation, I know of cases which are far worse, which were friends of mine had been raped by somebody, and then the victim is asked, well, how much alcohol did you have? Did you use contraception? Are you on any kind of birth control? Oh, well, then you must have planned to do it. You must wanted it. Did you scream? Oh, right. And then they were disfellowshipped, not the person who committed the crime. So, I mean, that's an extreme case, but it's not rare. So I wouldn't put it past them to think that it's okay.
Yeah. And I think the other thing you mentioned there is, from what you were saying, that one of the triggers for this violence was seemed to be alcohol. That was an element in what would sometimes bring this about. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and it wasn't necessarily that he was drunk and then did it. It was he wanted the alcohol in that situation, and it was a trigger for him if he didn't have it, which is I don't know if that's unique either, but yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because again, I think that's something else I think that Jehovah's Witnesses tend to try and keep a lid on, is they're very, and I think most, and I don't know if this changes around the world, but I certainly know my experience of growing up was you could actually be quite a heavy drinker as a JW and it was fine. They look down on what they would consider most, they look down on nicotine or marijuana or other drugs, but alcohol is a drug that there's quite a heavy drinking culture in JWs.
Oh, absolutely. Every party, even as a child, like everyone was drunk.
Yeah. And it's strange about this. This then leads on to, in some circumstances, either where people are denied alcohol or under the influence of alcohol. People will do things that they wouldn't necessarily do. And again, it feels like the JWs kind of turn a blind eye to it. There's almost like, I mean, I think Bethel's notorious for the amount of drinking that goes on in Bethel. I know from my own experiences, people would just get, off their faces drunk, and then alcohol can be like you say, people will do things under the influence of alcohol that can be physically violent, or they can be abusive in other ways. And it feels like the JW organization isn't really set up to know how to deal with that, other than beyond just kind of, they can sort of, they sometimes slap on judicial committees, but they're ill-equipped to address the underlying, issues that might trigger that alcoholism or that violence. Their interest is in treating the sin and not necessarily in supporting victims or enabling those survivors to get away from an abusive person.
Which is the really messed up part, right? Because if, say, in our situation, that kind of thing had happened, then you go to the police, then the police can then say, okay, what is the situation here? This person, although it might not, mean that he's going to go to jail or prison, maybe he has to have mandatory counseling to help him with his issues so he doesn't hurt anymore. Like you're stopping proper facilities within the governments to be able to close the loop on these kinds of behaviors, not even giving them the chance to do that. And I do know of a friend whose dad was also pretty abusive to her mum the whole time she was growing up. And he was the nice guy, he was the nice guy in the hall and everyone liked him. And she just has to stay with him because he hasn't committed adultery. And it's insane. So if they had dealt with that properly and she had been able to go to the police or even leave him and have a normal life, imagine how they could be helping victims, and imagine how much she's going through even now. She's still with him. I know she is, which is so upsetting because she's the nicest person on the planet, but they're subjecting her to this abuse every time they do something about it.
And really, they're kind of taking. There's an upcoming podcast I've got, which I did with Alice Cheshire, and we're talking about the importance of having healthy boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those boundaries is the ability to decide that somebody is, toxic and you don't want them in your life. And
Right.
one of the problems with domestic violence is the Watchtower. I mean, we recently had that Watchtower that came out that encouraged, battered wives, and was also, for the sake of fairness, battered husbands, because, we're increasingly finding out that there is domestic abuse sometimes from women towards men. But the key thing is that Watchtower article is encouraging people to try and stay together. Whereas, it's a person's right. If somebody punches you in the face, you are entirely within your rights to say, I have decided I don't want to see you again. Yeah. You've crossed the line, and if you take that decision, my personal decision is, you're gone. Watchtower takes that right away from people and says, well, you have to go back to them. And if you don't go back to them, we're going to start piling the pressure on, and there might be sanctions, and you can't get remarried, and if you do get remarried, we're going to shun you, and all of this stuff that absolutely destroys that individual's right to draw a boundary and decide that they don't want someone in their life anymore, and that they want to get on with their life without that person.
And that happened to us. Like, that is very normal thing for them to do. When that big incident happened, and I was like, okay, this has happened more times now, and this is not a one-off. Actually, I need to not live with this person anymore. I'm 17 years old. What do I do about it? I either decide I'm going to move out. I also don't have much education yet, so how am I going to afford to do that? Don't know. Mum, if you don't kick him out, I will leave, is what I said to her. And then she did. She kicked him out and said he has to get his own place, so he had to. That was done. And then the elders started getting involved and saying we need to be one family unit again, and we need to make attempts at like rebuilding the marriage and all of that kind of stuff. Imagine me sitting there in the hall listening to these meetings and people being nice and happy and all of that stuff, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to go back home with this guy. I really don't want to. And I have no control over that. That is insane. And now I have made the decision. I never want to speak to that man ever again in my life, because I still have I still have like dreams sometimes of like having conversations with him, and it's really anxiety inducing. Like, imagine if I had to speak to him for any reason. When my brother was very young and I wanted to go see him when he had custody of him, I would have to call him and make a plan. I used to get like panic attacks on the phone trying to just have a 5-minute conversation in order to get my brother, because I was so scared of how he might mentally manipulate a situation. Like, he would do things like, he called my last job that I was at. He tried to send them an email to say like I was a bad person and I was anti and I was like spewing hate towards a religion because I was part of the JW survey team. He went onto my LinkedIn and I saw that he had. And then he goes, I note that you have a volunteer on there as helping with this kind of stuff. It's quite ambiguous, actually, but he obviously knows what it is. And it was after I did a video with exVIF, and he was just angry that I'd done that. So, I mean, who knows if he'll hear this and have the same kind of behavior, but I think it's important to speak out about it. And you know what? I told someone at my job, hey, this might happen. I don't know if he already got in contact with you, but he said he threatened to like basically ruin my job that I've built all this time up, like trying to build my career and everything. And they said, oh, he won't have any effect on us. We know you. And we'll call the police. And I was like, okay.
Brilliant. That must have been fantastic to hear, because that worry, obviously, like you say, when someone's trying to tear down what you've built, it must have been fantastic to essentially, have the people you work with turn around and go, nah, he's just, the guy's an idiot.
Yeah. There is an element of that, but it's also embarrassing that you even have to talk about it to anyone. Like, I want to leave it in the past most of the time. I unless I'm going to talk about it in order to help other people, that is the only time that I want to talk about it, because from a bad thing comes good advice, or, I got over this, so can you, and, you're not alone, and that kind of mentorship kind of situation. Awesome. I want to help people. Great. However, I don't want to have to go into a professional environment and say, oh, here's my story, here's the thing. By the way, this person might contact you, even though I've left them behind in a different city far away. So there's kind of, yes, it is nice. And it is amazing to know that people out here in the real world are not like that. And they're like, oh, of course, we know you. And you were definitely a victim in that situation, but that's not going to happen again. We'll protect you, which is amazing, because when you're inside the religion, you just think that everyone out here might be, that it's a scary place. And if they're not doing this, they must be doing drugs and, just have terrible lives, and they're so unhappy. But yeah, I think I've gone around a little bit, but yeah.
On that subject, actually, that's what I was. You're mentioning kind of coming to terms with what happened and moving on, and kind of rebuilding your life afterwards. How have you? Because obviously, the witnesses, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society provides terrible advice as to how to deal with this. What have you found helpful in terms of dealing with this issue going forward? Are there any advice or tips you found useful that you could share with someone maybe who's going through domestic violence right now, or who has experienced it in the past and is trying to kind of move on and put it behind them?
Yeah, I think that one of the hardest things for me to get over was knowing that nothing was my fault, first of all. Second of all, just because now I'm past the statute of limitation and the police can't do anything about it doesn't mean that I can't do anything about it. Meaning that if I decide that this person is toxic, like you said earlier, and I don't want them in my life, guess what? I'm a grown woman and I don't have to speak to anybody that I don't want to anymore. And I don't have to consider them at all. And I know that my life is far more successful and I can be whoever I want to be, no matter what they ever said to me, no matter the emotional abuse, the physical abuse. I am strong and I'm independent and I can do whatever I set my mind to. And I feel like also I feel better about it now, because when I get close to people now in my life now, I will eventually open up to them about it. And actually, it's really therapeutic to be able to tell your close friends what happened to you. And you know what? They give you the best reassurance that, wow, I can't believe that happened. Like, you're amazing. And it's not that you want to get that kind of praise, but it's just nice for people to recognize that, no, that was not insignificant. That was difficult. And that is not what a child should have to go through. And it really does solidify your decisions that you make afterwards. And it helps you stop doubting yourself when you do want to make other decisions. Because like we said, they say, you should be together. You want to, let's build the family back together. You shouldn't hold a grudge. You need to forget about it now because he's sorry. He's repented. Therefore, you're now in the wrong if you don't accept that. Whereas, hey, you know what? I will never forgive him. And you know what? I'm at peace with it and it's okay because I don't like him and I never will. And that's normal and that's okay. You don't have to. And people giving you that kind of normalization of what normal behaviors are is really phenomenal. It does wonders, really. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, like you say, that one of the toxic mentalities that JW's put into you is if you have to forgive someone, you know, if their repentance and the elders say their repentance, you then have to forgive them. Actually, you don't. Like you say, you're perfectly entitled to say, no, you're done.
Yeah.
You know, I'm under no obligation to sort of ever speak to you again. I have decided that I want nothing further to do with you. I think a very empowering thing once you realize that you're not obligated to take people back into your life or to, you know, to have to associate with people. You don't owe them anything. You don't owe people a space in your social circle. And as a JW, you kind of felt like you had to owe people that. But you actually don't, and you're perfectly entitled to draw a boundary and say, you know, guess what, you're outside this boundary and I never want to see you again. And that's perfectly okay.
And that guilt that can eat you up on the inside, if they show you a scripture and they show you ironically something like 1 Corinthians around love and what the meaning of love is, and you're like, what the hell, man? Like, it's not loving to punch someone in the face. Like, really? It's not loving to show zero empathy to two victims who show up at your house. Actually, there's no empathy or love when it comes to telling a victim to stop talking about it because they're not over it and it's only been a few months. Like, no, actually, I don't need to feel guilty that I don't want that in my life anymore. And it does wonders when you don't have to have that constant reminder of that one thing that happened. It's pretty amazing. You know, you don't have to think about it every day anymore. If I had to see him every day, man, I would never forget about it, ever.
Yeah.
I'll just play it over and over in my head. I can replay it now. Like, when I talk about it, it's kind of like, you remember those specific hits that really hurt and the whole emotion of the day and everything. But guess what? Because I don't want that in my life, I don't have to think about it every day. So it's phenomenal what being allowed to make that decision without any guilt can bring you, what kind of peace that can bring you. Yeah.
Did you seek out any therapy for what you've been through? And if you did you find it helpful?
I actually didn't, no, because I think that after everything that happened, like, you're told, like, the elders are the people that you go to if you need this kind of help. So, you know, once you go and then you have this group of men basically tell you you're wrong and that you're the one who's kind of in the wrong and it's over. I think it was very hard for me to even think about talking about this to anyone for a very long time. Like, I didn't tell anyone for ages and ages. And it wasn't until like 2015 where I got very close to this one girl when I was traveling in America. And I told her, like, it was dirty. Like, I am like, I have some kind of past that's terrible and I'm going to tell you this thing. And she was like, oh man, can't believe that happened. And that's pretty much the reaction. And you're just kind of like, oh, okay. And I think that was the start of talking about it. And then I talk about it with close friends now and then if it kind of comes up. But I think I'm at peace with it now, whereas I don't need that kind of help. And I was able to get, our friendship and the friendship with the JW survey team really actually helped me a lot as well. Like, I didn't feel like I needed it anymore because I had those friends and connections. But I mean, I would have loved it when I was like 18. Oh man, that would have been amazing because I was still a kid. You know, I still needed that kind of guidance. So I think it would have been phenomenal to get that kind of help then. Yeah.
And that's interesting, coming onto that theme of like making connections and building connections. Because I know obviously you left the Jehovah's Witnesses. And I think, like a lot of exJWs, you kind of step out of that world and you step into like this kind of brave but scary new world that has lots of potential, but also potentially we might feel quite unprepared for. How did you go about starting to make those connections? Because it's clear that that's one thing that really helped you to deal with some of the pain and the baggage you were carrying out of that situation. So what did you do to start building those connections up?
Well, working was what I did. So I threw myself into work, and I was very young at first. So I really just kind of had administrative roles, but I decided, obviously I didn't go to university because that's frowned upon. And I couldn't at the time as well with my mum and all that whole situation with her going on, and it just wasn't the right time. So I'd actually quit school and decided to get a legal secretary diploma. Got that just so I could get into an office. And then after that, I just threw myself into it and just decided I'm going to learn anything that I enjoy at work, and I'm just going to learn it super hard. I'm going to go for it. And at first, when I first left, I managed to get into a relationship, which was nice, but it was more of a one-to-one kind of thing, and it still wasn't kind of enough as far as building those connections. So when we broke up, I did have like a significant period of time, probably around a year maybe, where I did feel like really, really lonely. It was super hard because you go from hundreds of friends, right? Like you have all of these connections and you're busy every single day. There's always something. Every weekend there's a social event of some sort. You're surrounded by people to pretty much no one's going to talk to you anymore. So I had a year where I threw myself into Grey's Anatomy. They were kind of my friends, which was fine because it actually gave me time to think about myself and think about what I wanted. And then after I was done with that, I did one post on one of the kind of forums, kind of said my story, and I made a little friend out of that. And we had like an online connection for a little while. We would talk a lot, which was super nice. And then he's from America, so it kind of expanded my outlook a little bit. And I started adding people on Facebook from school, and I thought to myself, wow, look at all these amazing things that people my own age are doing. And one of the things someone had done was go to do Camp America. So he'd gone to America for a few summers in a row, and he'd made a ton of friends, international friends from it, because you go there for like 3 or 4 months, and so do loads of other people from all over the world. So I thought to myself, why not? So I just paid for it, made the application, did a video, boom, I have a job at a traveling circus school in America. So
traveling circus. So you've got to tell us about this, because this is cool.
Right. So it happened very quickly because basically with applying for camps in America, you pretty much get a camp come to you and say, hey, would you like a job with us? Let's have an interview. The one that came to me was Circus of the Kids, traveling circus school. They go to a different camp every single week and teach kids circus skills. Sounds cool? Yes?
Very cool.
Disclaimer, I knew nothing about circus. Why would I? But I thought, you know what? Why not? I'm going to go. I like working with kids. You get to travel. And I went. It turns out, because I'm a super planner, that I knew I was going to go, but I'd managed to nail down a job from all of that learning that I had been doing, because I had no social life, on some software that I found quite interesting at work. So I'd landed a job with a company that implemented this software. So I was due to start the job in January, but then due to go to camp in May and have 4 months in America. So I said to them, you never get unless you ask, which is one of my biggest advice to everybody. You can ask for things in the real world, and the worst thing that's gonna happen is they might say no, but lots of times they do say yes. So I asked them, can I start the job in January, but can I have 4 months unpaid leave to go to the circus? And they're like, that's fun. Sure. It was that easy. So I ended up landing a job that I really, really wanted, and I got a summer in America. So I doing my job, then I go to America, and it's really, really, really hard work. Like 15-hour days, children constantly, not a moment's peace to yourself, really. It was so hard, but it was intensely fun looking back on it as well. I learned mad skills, but the thing that I gained from it most was that I got a few really good connections from it. We were living, working, socializing together. It's inevitable that you're going to make one or two friends, and they happen to be American. So I went back and visited, and went back and went back and went back, to the point where I now have probably more friends in the United States than I do in the UK. And I don't know what I would do without them. They are amazing. I love them. And that then, if you want me to carry on.
It's interesting, because I think what we're seeing, and obviously, if you carry on in a second, but what we're seeing kind of here is the answer to sort of, I work a lot of exJWs who think, well, how do I restart my life, is you just kind of threw yourself into it. You kind of, you threw yourself into it. You find that thing, and there will be fear. And that's, you can't grow unless you push yourself outside of your comfort zone.
And I think a good point on it as well is that I didn't make 100 new friends then. I made 2 or 3 really good friends over those 4 months. So these things, they do not happen overnight, just like with JWs. When you're a Jehovah's Witness, what happens is you walk into a Kingdom Hall, you say I'm a Jehovah's Witness, and you have 100 conditional friends right there. When you're in the real world, you say, hi, I'm Chloe. And you go, they talk back to you, but you're not friends yet. It's not instantaneous. These things take time to build. And people have friendships all the way back since when they were at school. So you don't have that benefit of history with these people. But you know what? It is terrifying. And I'm not naturally someone who wants to go off and make a ton of new friends, because it's actually super scary. But none of my friends now would know that, because I just bite the bullet and go, okay, I'm going to put myself out there, and whoever wants to be my friend will be. I think you kind of just have to trust that there are really amazing people that you will mesh with out there, and there might be 10, not 100. So
I had a similar thing in that you kind of you at first you feel quite lonely because you had all these like hundreds of friends and now they're all gone, but then you realize that, well, and some of those people actually would have, I think I would have genuinely been friends with, if we hadn't been JWs. But a lot of those people are conditional. And a lot of those people, you didn't really have any genuine connections with them. You more like you had a tribal affiliation. And because you had that tribal affiliation, that's what you think a friendship is. And I had a similar process where I just had to throw myself into things that, like, I did a lot of stuff with Meetup. There's an app called meetup.com that has all these interests that people are around you into all these meetings. So like, anything from stamp collecting to reading to hobbies to history to philosophy to literally anything you can think of. And one thing I did was join those and went to all these meetups. And now there's a lot of people I know from that, and there's a couple of people who now I consider friends. And it takes a while, but for me that was a really good way of doing it. And the other thing for me also was work. There's a couple of people now, because now I'm allowed to socialize with people at work, so I accepted all the social invitations, even though it made me feel profoundly uncomfortable. And from that, I've got a couple of people who, again, they're really good friends, but it's kind of built up over time.
Absolutely. Well, one of my best friends is from work. Like, I didn't even know what I would have done without her over the last 3 or 4 years, because she is a phenomenal woman, and she's Hindu. I mean, imagine hanging out with somebody who is religious and it's not a Jehovah's Witness, right? And imagine just like respecting their opinions and their views and their beliefs. Oh my goodness. And she is so inspiring. She's a lawyer. She managed to help me learn how to do so many things as an adult, pretty much. Like, okay, navigating relationships, talking to friends and family, and all kinds of things, getting to know London, you know, like she's awesome. And she inspired me to travel and do loads of things. And she's always been someone since I've known her to be kind of like, oh, do you want to do that? Yeah, I reckon you can. You definitely can. You've got this. I'm so proud of you. And she wrote me this amazing card before I moved to New Zealand, and I cried because she's wonderful. I couldn't imagine not knowing her now. So yeah, so I think the key things are about, like you said, putting yourself out there and then just accepting I accepted every single invite like you, because I was just like, okay, I'm going to do everything I can within my power to not reject any kind of social situation, because I mean, what else am I going to do at that point?
And also, I like what you mentioned about how that piece of advice is that, and I would totally agree with this, is like you're allowed to ask for what you want, and the worst thing that can happen is just they say no. Because I think as a Jehovah's Witness, I felt very much you have to wait and be told. But it's so liberating. Like in that situation with your job, you were like, you know what, actually, I'd like to take the job, but I also want to do this. So I'd like to do both, and I'm just going to ask for it. Yeah. And they said yes. And it's actually quite surprising how often, if you just say, you know what, I'd like to do X and I'd like to do Y, can we make that happen? People will kind of go, yeah, all right.
And in fact, I think that actually it makes you more attractive to employers in that kind of situation, because they're like, oh, this person's interesting and they know what they want to do. Cool. Well, I'm not paying for it anyway. I'm just giving them some time off. Why not? Why wouldn't they let you do that? And any company that is worth working at will probably let you as well, because they're good people, you know?
I mean, that's very much a thing. A company that's worth working for is looking for people who are motivated and have interests, and who will actually, because that's what you want. You want your employees to be motivated individuals who will actually stand up and think outside the box, or just ask for what they want, or because then they'll be doing that for you as well. They'll be doing that for your company. They'll be asking for things for your company that maybe, you know, a more timid employee wouldn't do, or they'll be more innovative. So people actually, whereas the Jehovah's Witness mentality is you kind of like cower down and you're told what to do, and you kind of like stand hand-wringing before Jehovah with your cap in hand and maybe meekly ask for something. The reality is, in the real world, people who ask for what they want tend to get what they want.
Yeah.
It's quite empowering once you realize that. And as you said, the worst thing that happens is they say no. And you either go, okay, or you go, okay, well, can we negotiate this? Well, you know, is there a version of this that is acceptable? And you can it's amazing how much you can turn your life around just with that mentality.
It's very different than elders saying no. And if you dare like disagree with me, then you're in trouble, to, okay, negotiation. Oh, that's a new concept, you know? I know that like we can laugh about it now, but like people who've done this for much longer than we stayed in, and they're coming out, maybe they're 25 years older than me, and they're thinking, you know what, I want to go to university and I want to have a career now. You can, but those kinds of ingrained kind of behaviors and mentalities don't just go away overnight. But I guess maybe hearing from some other people who have done it, to say, yeah, your opinions are important, and what you want in your life, what you want, not what someone else is telling you that you should do, what you want is important, because this is your life. What do you want? Okay, I've decided I want A, B, and C. All right, what are the steps to getting there? And that is like so okay, and it's really underestimated, and a lot of people on the outside won't even understand that concept. I'm very grateful for my situation, in that I've had some of these things happen and they might be traumatic, but I was reading recently about this thing called post-traumatic growth, which is kind of like not necessarily the opposite to post-traumatic stress, but it's more like the benefit of, having this psychological adversity or something else, some other challenges have made you realize what is important to you and help you then think about, how do I get over this? And you kind of realize, wow, I haven't been doing this thing that I wanted for 5 years? Okay, nothing's going to stop me from getting the things that I want now and learning new things and doing new things and having new experiences. I'm going to ask everyone for the things that I want who are in my life. Just so many more doors open to you when you have that kind of psychological shift from, like you said, you can do this if someone lets you rather than asking for it, if that makes sense. Like a lot of people, even people who haven't been Jehovah's Witnesses or have been in any kind of cult or anything, might be like, okay, I'm never going to kind of ask for a pay rise because they offer you a pay rise and you accept, or you move to another job because you didn't get that pay rise. Actually, if you said, hey, I deserve this pay rise because since I started, the job that I took was this, and now I do X, Y, and Z extra, plus the quality of my work has gone from this to this. I deserve this much more. That's the sort of a negotiation, and it works. So there's things like that I've done as well, which I realized, and I've picked up along the way from getting advice from other people at work. So
yeah, I was going to ask actually, because I mean, there's two things you mentioned there which are really interesting to me, and the first is that post-traumatic growth concept. That's really interesting because there's so much of it is how we frame what's happened to us and how we use it. And obviously, as you say, people go through incredibly difficult circumstances, but then you kind of come out the other side and you see there's two reactions. And this isn't to kind of like say, obviously people go through horrible things that I could never understand, but you sort of see two types of reaction. One is the kind of the person who lets that experience destroy their life that comes next. But the other is the kind of person who takes that experience and uses it to drive, like you say, okay, wow, I got through this, or this has taught me who I am as a person, or I am not going to let this thing define me. And it becomes something that drives them to go out and actually get what they want. In many ways, that's the kind of the exJW experience when you leave as a former Jehovah's Witness. You can either let what the JWs, you can either look back and say, oh, it's terrible, I've lost all this time in a cult, which is something I struggled with when I left. I was like, well, I've lost, half my life's been like eaten by this cult. But it kind of made me, okay, well, what do I want to do with the other half? Because now the other half is down to me.
Yes.
I can't sit here and blame I can sit here and blame the JWs for the bit that I was in, but now I'm not a Jehovah's Witness anymore. So what comes next, I can't blame Watchtower for. I have to take responsibility for this. Absolutely. And also I don't want to waste this time. Because I've seen what it's like to waste that time, and I've seen what it's like to spend all those years doing something you don't want to do. And for me, it's now this drive to kind of actually go out and get the life I want, and to follow the interests and to follow the dreams. Right. And so much of it comes down to, I think, like I'm fascinated. I'll have to do more reading on this concept of post-traumatic growth, because it seems to be, I can quite see how that happens for some people. And that's not to dismiss post-traumatic stress. Obviously, that people will. There are circumstances that people will need therapy, they'll need counselling, and there'll be something there that needs help.
Post-traumatic stress disorder is a medical condition.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Wants to discount anybody's, actual emotional conditions or heartaches at all. This is just a concept that I found very interesting as well, and the fact that a lot of the time this is very, very common. And it does say, Wikipedia is not the source of all truth, but on Wikipedia, it does say that encouragingly, reports of growth experiences in the aftermath of traumatic events far outnumber the reports of psychiatric disorders, since continuing personal distress and growth often coexist. So it is far more common than I think people would even necessarily think about if they're not kind of thinking about this. You see a lot of the negativity around stress and what it can do to you. But if you have some challenging circumstances, like you said, then you can say, all right, well, the past is the past. What am I going to do with the future? And that doesn't mean that you don't need some healing time. Like I talked about, I had that year of, just being with myself and feeling comfortable in my own body. And it was, it was a bit lonely, but after that, it was kind of like, oh, the world is my oyster. What do I want to do with it?
Speaking of that, so we kind of on your career, we've got to the point where you were you started this job that also gave you the time off to go and be in the circus, which is kind of awesome. And obviously now since then, your career and your life has progressed. You've been kind of I know your career has been progressing and you've been globetrotting. So how have you kind of found that path that you're forging now? Do you have any tips for someone who's looking to kind of like forge ahead with a career that might open up doors to travel? Because that's something else. And I want to get onto specific travel tips later, but that kind of career where someone's thinking, you know what, I'd love to like get a career going, but also I like the concept of seeing the world. So how's that? What tips would you have for that?
Well, I'll be perfectly honest. Some of it was a complete accident, and some of it was that I asked for these things. So the first thing that I would say is choose what's important to you first. So for me personally, career is super important because I love learning new things, and I work in learning and development technology spaces. So I get the best of my kind of mathematical minded side, plus the empathy and learning because I didn't get to learn before. So it kind of groups all of those things together, which is perfect for me. And I absolutely love what I do. I love helping people with the power of technology. I love helping people be able to learn again. So for me, I picked something and I found something by accident. I found it that I really, really love. So for other people, they may want to be able to get a nice, steady income and be able to have an awesome personal life. So just have enough money to be able to do all of those things. So I'll talk a bit more about my kind of how I view it for me, because I just didn't want to discount people who, they have their 9 to 5 or they have their job and everything else is important, because I'm pretty passionate about what I do. So that kind of plays a big role in how I've progressed. So I got this job that let me go to the circus, yes. But it also exposed me to a lot of healthcare organizations in the UK. So for a long time, I was implementing the software, helping people learn National Health Service, private healthcare, and then a few other like private banks and everything. And that way I managed to meet a lot of people in the kind of London, Southwest area as well. And so I met so many people and learned lots of skills from them. And I would kind of put my all into all of that. And it turns out that my boss saw my kind of hunger to learn and do things. So he would give me more and more responsibilities, and I would also ask for them. And I would say, I don't need help with this anymore. And I would kind of go off and do it by myself. And I would learn everything from the internet I possibly could about this. And then it got to a point where I was visiting America quite a lot on holidays. So I was taking leave to do it. And I ended up dating one of my friends that I met at the circus, her cousin, because they're a lovely Jewish family and they decided they wanted to play matchmaker. So I thought, I love going to America. And our team at work had grown to the point where I was at a more senior level and I was kind of running the implementations from a program management standpoint. So really I was in charge of helping make sure all of the projects were on track and they were consistently delivered. So at that point, I had people going and doing that job that I already had been doing. So it meant that I didn't need to go to physical clients anymore as much. I could make phone calls and I could, work from wherever in the world. I'm pretty much a digital nomad at this point, controversial. But it meant that I could take my laptop and be wherever, because if I did the work that needed to be done in any location, it really didn't matter. So I asked my boss, I have this boyfriend here now and I kind of want to go visit him, but I don't really want to take leave for this because I'm going to work and he's going to work, but I just want to spend like evenings and weekends with him. And guess what? I asked for it And he said yes. So a lot of people that I worked with worked for exactly the same company, the exact same boss. They never did what I did because they didn't ask. So there's that case again. So I ended up working for probably it was a week at first to trial it, and then it went to a month. I tried again, and then it was 6 weeks, and then I spent 3 months, which is what you can spend when you go over to the States as a citizen. So, I did that. And actually, I'd gone to the point where I went full-blown ambition on them. I was like, okay, we're a small UK company. We're implementing this software here. Who says we can't take over America? Controversial. But turns out, not so controversial. So I convinced the company to open up a US subsidiary, and I was going to go do some market research. And it turns out, so I did that last year, and then it was pretty exciting because I got to spend a lot of time with new friends, and I got to be, I was actually spending a lot of time on the island of Key West. So it's just off the coast of Miami, pretty much, and it's right at the bottom of America. And I got embedded into this small community. It's only 25,000 people. So it actually was an amazing time to kind of find myself, I say in inverted commas, because when you're in a big city like London, it's very difficult to see people as people and be human. Whereas when you're in a small town where people are fairly relaxed, you know, there's the beach, there's music, there's everyone's just friendly and happy, you can kind of make friends overnight. And that's what I did. So I was kind of considered a local by the time that I left, which was pretty awesome. And then I also went to Seattle for a month. And this is all my ideas. So this is the point again of having an idea and just asking if you can do it. So this was my idea as well. So I was like, okay, I think a very good area for this kind of business is the Pacific Northwest of America. I did my research. I wrote a paper on marketing and how we could do this kind of thing. I do not come from a marketing background, but, you know, Google can help.
Absolutely.
And I was also studying leadership and management at this point as well from a distance learning perspective. So you have to kind of, you know, take on projects and be innovative and ambitious and try and figure out how to get through these kinds of different areas. So I did that, and I ended up in a community in Seattle. There's a awesome learning and development community in Seattle who really also love technology. And I ended up mixing with a few people there, and also a good group of people who worked at Amazon at the time, which was like, what? Really? I could do this? Seriously? I am nobody. I come from nowhere, and these people are asking me serious questions and respecting the answers. That was kind of mind-blowing, really. So I just carried on and just kind of got embedded into that community. And then they had a call for speakers at this conference in May, that following May. And I applied, and I'm like, well, I'll apply, but there's no way they're going to pick me. But, you know, if you don't ask, you definitely don't get. So I applied, and I got it. Oh, my goodness. Wow.
Bureaucratic ministry school training paying off there.
Right. Go for it. Yeah, which was phenomenal to me. And this would have been like my first kind of public speaking since I had left Jehovah's Witnesses, which is actually kind of scary when you think about it, because now this is about me. This is like me trying to impart knowledge to other people, and if they think it's terrible, it's me. It's not someone else has developed this material. Like I'm developing the material based on my own research. That's pretty mind-blowing. Well, it was to me anyway. I was like, I'm no one, I can't do this, but I'm just going to do it anyway, because how else do you grow? Like, you have to step out of your comfort zone. You really do. You have to feel uncomfortable in order to progress in any way.
Yeah.
So I did that. Turns out also I had some other diversity when I got adversity, not diversity, adversity when I got back to the UK, in that my job was kind of a little bit redundant. And I found that out in May, just before I was supposed to fly to this other conference that Barack Obama was going to be speaking at. And you know what? They wanted to say that I shouldn't go to that now because I wasn't going to be working there anymore. And I just said, I negotiated. No doesn't mean no. I negotiated that I should go, because after all of the work that I've put in for them, this is kind of my own personal development, and I really want to go and I really believe in it. And then also because I'd got the other conference, so the Barack Obama conference was at the beginning of May, and the second one that I was speaking at was at the end of May. So I figured, shall I just go to America for a month now that I don't have work or whatever? Why not? So I did, and I made a ton of business cards because I was terrified. I hadn't been in this situation before. Everything was going great, and then it just wasn't. So it just shows you that it doesn't mean like, the sun doesn't always shine, but you have to be proactive. Otherwise, no one just gives you stuff unless you prove that you're worth giving anything to. So I made all these business cards. I was going to find a new job. I was going to be able to find clients. I even set up my own company because I was like, oh my goodness, if I don't have that. So I had all these different plans. And I think that's one of the things about my personality, is that I'll be like, okay, I have a problem. All right, let's not wallow in this right now, because what am I going to do next? And I set up 5 different plans and see which one bites properly first. And that's what I did. And I went to that conference where Barack Obama was speaking. I listened to him about leadership, and I went to all of the talks around being a strong leader as a woman, which is something else we can talk about as well. But that was really empowering, and it just made me realize that I do have a lot to offer. I'm not this insignificant person that doesn't know anything. And we're all learning. We're all constantly learning. So it's okay to not know everything right now. So, sorry. And I'll say one more thing, and then we'll...
Yeah, go for it.
It's my punchline. I decided also, there was a stand there for the software that I had been implementing for the last 3.5 years. And I knew some of the people there because I interacted with them before at other conferences, and I just volunteered to help them on their stand before because I wanted to interact with clients and stuff and learn from people. So what I did was I just kind of opened my laptop and I just started working on the stand and said, hey, I'm kind of bored. Can I help you guys out? And I got a job from that. Yeah, now I'm working for that company. So it's pretty it's putting yourself out there is the biggest thing. Yeah.
That is awesome. And it's actually, I think that nicely illustrates the way real life works, because you didn't just have all of this sort of you didn't leave the exJWs and then just kind of accidentally have all of this success falling into your lap. You found something you were passionate about. You worked hard at it because, as you were saying, you were sort of studying everything you could about this industry in your spare time. You were doing all this training. You were ambitious. You're clearly working hard at your job. You're asking for more responsibility. You're delivering results, because that's one thing, as an employee, you need to sort of deliver what you're promising.
Yeah.
You're doing your research. You're being ambitious. So you're working really hard to achieve it. But once you start working hard like that, and also, like you say, putting yourself out there. So when you found that you were going to be losing that job potentially, you were like, right, I'm going to make a load of business cards. I'm still going to negotiate going to these 2 conferences because that's, that's really useful for me, and you negotiated that. And then while you're there, you just set yourself up with a laptop and say, can I help anyone? And that's that kind of spirit of like hard work that, and like I said, and now you're in Middle Earth right now as a result of this. And like you said, when we were sorting out this chat today, so you've just been to the beach and you've got this, we were sort of chatting about, New Zealand, and you're having a great time there. And it's this life that, could you imagine yourself living this life when you were a JW? Was this the kind of life you imagined for yourself, or is it sort of
this is
your wildest dreams?
This is dreamland. Like, I'm pinching myself on a daily basis. I'm so appreciative of everything that I have and what I'm able to do and the freedom that I have. And one of Lloyd's videos where he has freedom is my paradise and all those photos where everyone comes in and they're all holding these signs. Like, that's how I feel every single day. I live in this paradise of a place that I love right now, that I just don't want to leave, and that I have this job that I really enjoy. It's really, really hard. My job is so hard and it's very demanding, but I love it. And I have met awesome people already. Like, even to illustrate the amount that I still put myself out there, like, when I first arrived in New Zealand, I was seconded to a second company in order to help their business before I was able to start my job, which I just started just over a month ago. So, patience is also a virtue. But I decided I'll invite both offices, all of them, to my house for a party. I don't know any of these people. I don't know the culture of the businesses. I just knew I'm in a brand new country and I know approximately 4 people. And I did that. And you know what? My house now is open to anyone, and they know that. So like Fridays is kind of ironically, they say, oh, we'll probably end up at Chloe's. How awesome is that? Like, I would never imagine that would have happened like in that first year of loneliness. I had such terrible thoughts about myself. And I thought to myself, what, no one's in my house right now. And, my family that I was living with, I was like, they're on holiday. Imagine if I just like died here. Like, no one would find me because I don't have any friends. Like, going from that to, wow, I don't remember the last time I spent like a day by myself, and I kind of really want a day by myself. Like, it's polar opposite, and I just want to emphasize to anybody who is struggling right now or is wondering about possibly leaving but is kind of terrified about the big bad world out there. Life is hard. Really not going to downplay that at all. But life is wonderful if you just put yourself out there and you try and do the things that you love to do. You will get positive things back. You just have to keep asking and not worry about anyone that says no or people who might not recognize what you're able to offer. It's okay, because there's hundreds of more people, there's millions more people, there's billions more people who will notice. And if you just try hard, like, you're going to succeed.
Yeah, thank you. I want to get you back on to do a second show, Chloe, because there's 2 things I want to sort of drill down into more. And one is tips for living abroad, and the other is leadership, especially, like you say, for women. And I think those 2 things are kind of their own show. So I'm hoping I can twist your arm and get you back on for a follow-up fairly soon.
I talked your ear off. It's been that long.
No, this is fantastic. And I think because what you sort of mentioned there, I think that's the perfect note to end this show on, is like that. Because when we're with Jehovah's Witnesses, we're basically told you can't do anything for yourself. You have to, if you want anything out of life, you basically have to wait for Jehovah God to give it to you in the new system.
Something that resonates with me on that is when they tell you, and everyone who's ever been a Jehovah's Witness will remember this, but do not lean upon your own understanding. Guess what? Do it, because it's awesome. Like, trust yourself. Learning to trust yourself is the best thing you can possibly do.
Absolutely. And I think that is a fantastic point to end this episode on. And Chloe, we're going to have to get you back on because I want to talk travel tips, because you've done a lot of living in other countries. And I think that's something a lot of exJWs would be quite ambitious to do. And also really that aspect of leadership, because I think that's good for everybody anyway, but also especially for women, because the problem is being brought up as a JW. If you're a woman, you're told you can't lead. But the reality, obviously, is that women make fantastic leaders. And I think I kind of want to do that as its entirely own episode, because I think that's such an important topic to cover. So, yeah.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, Chloe, thank you so much for joining us on the Forwardcast today. Is there anywhere we can find more of your work or what you do online?
So there's a couple of things. So there's if you want to know more about my kind of full story, if you're interested, I mean, just to give you more history on it, there's on the exFifth channel, he has a video with me, and it should just say my name on there from the JW survey team, and I'm sure we'll be able to find the link for them. Also, I recently started a blog. Who knows if it's abandoned, but it is nothing to do with Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's all to do with my work and what I enjoy doing, and it's called chloelearns.com. There's only 4 blogs so far, we'll see.
Cool. chloelearns.com. And I think that's actually quite important as well, as like you say, once you leave the Jehovah's Witnesses, you are an ex-Jehovah's Witness, but you don't want that to define who you are, and you don't want that to be every aspect of your life. So
absolutely.
Cool. Awesome. Well, Chloe, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm disgustingly jealous of the awesome scenarios you find yourself in New Zealand, full of like Middle Earth and hobbits and elves and stuff. Is that right? I'm presuming you're surrounded by beautiful elvish people and short little hobbits right now. So
I think that's probably me. I'm the short one, but
you're the hobbit.
5'2", but close.
Hobbitish, close to hobbit. Cool. Well, Chloe, have a great time over in New Zealand, and we'll speak to you again soon.
If you've enjoyed this show or found it useful, there are many ways you can support it. You can leave us a star rating or a written review on iTunes or whatever podcast software you use to listen to the show. You can share the show on social media, Twitter or Facebook. You can discuss the show on the exJW Reddit or any of the other social media platforms. But most important of all, if you found some of this advice or these experiences useful, well, put it into practice, because you only get one life. So seize it by the scruff of the neck and make it a hell of a life worth living. Okay guys, take care. See you next time.